Thank you again for coming along. And I forgot to mention that Charlie has some members of his family here, which is wonderful to see. And thank you very much for coming. You must be very proud.
Absolutely.
I always remember my grandfather taking me outside, putting binoculars in my hand, and telling me that some of the stars that I could see no longer were there, but that the light had travelled, and what I was seeing in the moment was the deep past. And it made me think of that when I saw these incredible documents, because we know the Odyssey through a remarkable transmission via text, including annotations or scholia in text, and somehow the story has managed to hang on and be transmitted to us to enjoy today in these objects. So it's a rare opportunity, and we very much look forward to hearing what we have to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm going to start here with the papyrus. It's not quite in date order, but almost, and then move up towards the more modern stuff here. So this first little bit of papyrus, this really is the Odyssey. This is a 3rd century CE papyrus. It's written in the mixed style, I think. And it's a little extract of Odyssey 5, where Odysseus is on his raft out at sea, and the goddess Leucothea appears to him and gives him her veil to save him from drowning in his shipwreck. And you might just be able to see on this line here, there's the Greek word kleremnon, which means veil. And up here, on I think it's the 4th line, there's oinopa, which is followed in the Greek by ponton, the wine dark sea, which you will all know is very famous. So a lovely little bit of papyrus there that has ended up in the Bodleian. On the theme of Odysseys, I'm taking the title a bit loosely, so I also wanted to show you this papyrus, which came up in the catalogue as Odyssey ? It's definitely not the Odyssey, but the very last line of the papyrus, you'll see it's fragmented, it's a very thin column. The very last line says Odysseys, and I think somebody might have just spotted that and thought, it's probably a bit of Odyssey, that'll do, good enough. And I think this is just having to go off my own papyrological skills here, but the handwriting here is a very lovely formal hand. You can compare it nicely to the other one, and it looks very similar to the famous Hawara Homer that lives here in the Bodleian. So it could be, possibly about the same sort of time frame. Then that's a sort of Odyssey, how do papyri end up in a format that we can use them? And then we're going to jump ahead from the 2nd, 3rd century to the late 10th century with this manuscript. This is just one of the most, for me at least, one of the most remarkable manuscripts in the Bodleian's collection. This is a manuscript of V-Scholia to the Odyssey. For those of you who know about Iliad Scholia, that's the equivalent to the D-Scholia. This is a collection of ancient glosses and book summaries to the Odyssey. The thing that is so remarkable, apart from the fact that it's late 10th century and still in pretty good condition, is the fact that the manuscript stemma on the table will show you, from the recent edition of the Odyssey Scholia, this is the archetype for all manuscripts of the V-Scholia, and it's sort of 500 years older than any other surviving manuscript. So this is a really amazing survival, and the fact that it is in the Bodleian at all is quite a story. Again, loose theme of Odysseys. This was owned by Nicolai, who some of you may know, very famous humanist, very important, once owned the famous Venetus A manuscript of the Iliad. And it was in the Biblioteca Medicia Laurentiana in Florence, where it had sort of ended up. And Arthur Ludwig, a German editor of the Odyssey Scholia, had gone to see this manuscript in Florence. And he writes in his publication that he spent weeks searching the city for it in vain, couldn't find it, and he therefore had to assume that it had been lost or dispersed or stolen or something. Of course, that's not what had happened. It had been sold to the Bodleian in 1832 for the princely sum of just £100. In today's money, that's less than £10,000. Of how they pulled that off at that time, I have no idea. There was a canny curator has managed to pinch that from the Florentines. Okay, moving on a little bit later, we have a pair of manuscripts that have a fascinating history together. So this first one, this is Holkham Gr 84. This is a manuscript of the Odyssey, again with book summaries for each book. We know based on the watermarking of the paper that this was written in about 1460, maybe 1460 to 1470 in Padua. And what is really interesting is both that it has the same scribal hand as this other manuscript on the end, but when it first passed into the Bodleian collection, which I'll talk about a bit more in a second, it was noted that both these manuscripts also had annotations in the same Italian humanist hand. So this is a traditional Greek manuscript script that it's written in, and there are annotations in Greek and in Latin in this other Italian humanist hand, but there's no indication of who that hand might belong to. It's not signed. So these two are obviously linked. There's a third manuscript as well of Herodotus' histories, also from Holkham Hall, also by the same scribe and so on. And the thing that I think is really nice, before talking a bit more about the history, is that here we've got our manuscript of the Odyssey. It's written absolutely beautifully, very well preserved. And this is a copy of Philostratus's Heroicus, which is a fictionalized dialogue between a visiting Phoenician and a vine tender who works in the garden of the hero cult of Protesilaus. Protesilaus, famous in the Iliad as being the first Greek hero to die at Troy when he gets off his ship. I think they dramatized that moment in Troy, possibly. So in this dialogue, the vine tender talks to the ghost of Protesilaus and he reports his discoveries to this visiting Phoenician. And one of his key things is actually Odysseus, absolute scoundrel. And the poet Homer made a deal with the ghost of Odysseus. So he would learn all the information about Troy from the ghost of Odysseus in exchange for favorable coverage in the epics for Odysseus. So I really like that these two have stuck together and that we're complicating the story of Odysseus. However, the real Odyssey here, I think, really is these two manuscripts. So Holkham Hall, it's the ancestral home of the Earls of Leicester, and the Bodleian bought over 100 Greek manuscripts from the hall in 1960. I don't know exactly how much for. I hope for more than 100 pounds. And at the time it was noted that these were by the same scribal hand, and the annotations were also noted and linked. But it wasn't until 1973 that R.W. Hunt, who I've learned from Chris, was a very eminent manuscript specialist here at the Bodleian, published an article in the Bodleian Library Record. So, almost 15 years later, he had seen other manuscripts elsewhere with Italian humanist annotations belonging to a man called Pietro da Montagnana. And somehow, 15 years later, he said, "Oh, that's the same hand as in our Holkham Hall manuscripts." And he checked them, and sure enough, it is the same hand, which absolutely blows me away. Which means we can reconstruct the history of these manuscripts, and I'll go in date order rather than how it was reconstructed. So we go all the way back to 1220. The monastery of San Giovanni was founded in Verdara near Padua, and it sort of flourishes. It has a bumpy time, and then it sort of re-emerges in under the care of some humanists. And this guy, Pietro da Montagnana, moves there to spend his final 20 years or so in this monastery. While he's there, he moves there in 1458. Around 1460, he has these two manuscripts, a third one, possibly more, copied out, and they stay in the monastery library. And when he dies, all of his books stay with the monastery. They stay there. In 1639, a catalogue is made of all the books in this monastery. And the Odyssey one doesn't appear for some reason, but the other two, this Heroicus and the Herodotus, do. But some books have already gone, apparently, from the monastery library. And then in 1717, a young British upstart noble called Thomas Coke goes, as you would, on his grand tour through Italy, driving around, picking up whatever people would sell to him, and he buys a load of manuscripts, more than 40 Greek manuscripts and Latin manuscripts from this monastery library, brings them back to Holkham Hall, again, this ancestral home of his family, the Coke family, and at some point in the early 19th century, these manuscripts are rebound. So a bit later, we can maybe have a look at the bindings because they're really pretty. They stay there then for over 200 years. In 1960, they are bought by the Bodleian, brought into the special collections here, and then finally, they're initially catalogued by Ruth Barber, and then finally in 1973, R.W. Hunt identifies these scribal annotations, and that at long last is how we get them here today. And I think that is just as much of an adventure as anything Odysseus gets up to. I'll leave it there, but please do come talk to me about any of these. Thank you.